The great hall of the conclave station stretched for nearly a kilometer, its walls lined with the banners of 12 galactic empires, and at the center of it all, a massive circular table held representatives from species that had conquered stars before humanity had learned to make fire. Ambassador Kethrol of the Dominion rose from his seat, his forearms spread wide in a gesture of triumph, and his scales caught the light as he addressed the gathered powers. "My friends," he said, his voice echoing through the chamber. "Today we finalized the pacification accords, and with them, we secured the future of civilized space." Laughter rippled through the assembly, because everyone knew what pacification really meant. And they all understood that the target was a small blue planet orbiting a minor yellow star in a forgotten corner of the galaxy. High Arbiter Zahn of the hegemony leaned forward, his massive insectoid body clicking with amusement, and he spoke in a voice like grinding stone. "The humans have been spacefaring for barely 2 centuries, and they still fight among themselves over resources and ideology. So I see no reason to delay their integration into our collective interests." Integration, of course, meant conquest, and conquest meant the strip-mining of Earth, the enslavement of its population, and the distribution of human territory among the signing parties. The representatives signed one by one, pressing their various appendages to the document, and none of them noticed the small alert that flickered on the station's communication. A Ray ship had arrived. The vessel was laughably small by galactic standards, barely 300 meters long, and its design was crude and utilitarian, lacking the elegant curves of Dominion cruisers or the brutal efficiency of hegemony warships. "What is this?" demanded Admiral Yethra, her clawed hand gesturing toward the view screen that had appeared above. The Table A junior officer's voice came through the speakers, trembling slightly. "A human vessel, Admiral, and they are requesting permission to address the conclave." The hall erupted in laughter, and several ambassadors wiped tears from their various eye configurations, because the idea of humans demanding anything was simply too amusing. High Arbiter Zahn raised one of his massive arms for silence. "Let them speak," he said, his mandibles clicking with cruel delight. "For I have not been entertained in many cycles, and watching primitives beg for mercy will brighten my day." The great doors at the end of the hall slid open, and Captain Elena Vasquez walked in alone. She was a small woman by any species standards, her hair gray and her face lined with age. But she walked with a steadiness that made some of the more observant ambassadors shift uncomfortably in their seats. She wore a simple uniform, black with silver trim, and on her chest was a single medal that none of them recognized. "You have 5 of your minutes," High Arbiter Zahn said, not bothering to hide his contempt. "I suggest you use them to beg for favorable terms in your species." Inevitable submission. Captain Vasquez stood at the center of the chamber, surrounded by beings who could order her death with a gesture. And she smiled. It was not the smile of a frightened primitive, and it was not the smile of someone who had come to beg. "We received your pacification accords," she said, her voice calm and clear, "and we decline." Silence fell over the chamber, followed by confused murmuring, because no one had ever declined a conclave decision, and no one certainly had the power to enforce such a refusal. Ambassador Kethrol rose again, his scales flushing with anger. "You decline," he repeated, his voice dripping with disbelief. "And what army do you have to back this refusal?" "Little human, because last I checked, your entire fleet consists of 47 outdated vessels that my personal guard could destroy before breakfast." Captain Vasquez's smile did not waver. "We thought you should know something," she said, and her voice carried to every corner of the vast hall. "Because we have not been alone for a very long time, and we have simply been quiet." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small device, and before anyone could stop her, she pressed a single button. "These are coordinates," she said, and I suggest you look at them. Every sensor array on the station went dark. 3 seconds passed in absolute blackness. And in those 3 seconds, several ambassadors felt something they had not experienced in centuries: fear. The lights returned. And so did the sensors, and when the view screen above the table flickered back to life, every being in the chamber stopped breathing. Something was there. It hung in space like a shadow given form. Angular and black and radiating energy signatures that made the station's computers scream in confusion. And it was massive beyond anything the gathered empires had ever constructed. 17 kilometers long, the largest Dominion dreadnought measured 2 kilometers from bow to stern. And it was considered a marvel of engineering, a symbol of imperial might that took decades to construct. This thing was nearly 9 times larger, and it had appeared from nowhere. "What is that?" whispered Admiral Yethra. And her voice had lost all its arrogance. Captain Vasquez turned to look at the view screen, and her smile finally faded, replaced by something harder and colder. "That is the warship Prometheus Unbound," she said, "and it is the first of our new fleet. And we built it because we remembered every time your empires looked at us and saw only resources to exploit." She turned back to face the assembled powers, and now there was fire in her eyes. "We remembered every diplomatic mission you ignored, and every trade agreement you refused, and every time your ships violated our space and your governments told us it was within acceptable parameters." High Arbiter Zahn had risen from his seat, his massive body trembling with something between rage and terror. "This is impossible," he said, "because you are primitives, and you cannot possibly have technology that surpasses ours." Captain Vasquez laughed. "And it was not a kind sound. We found something," she said, 70 years ago in our outer solar system. And it was the wreckage of a vessel from a civilization that existed millions of years before any of your empires crawled out of your respective primordial soups." She let that sink in for a moment. "The Forerunners left gifts for those clever enough to find them. And we found them. And while you were busy dividing the galaxy among yourselves and planning our subjugation, we were building." The view screen showed the Prometheus Unbound rotating slowly, and lights were coming on along its hull, revealing weapon systems that no one in the chamber could identify. "So here is what happens now," Captain Vasquez said, and her voice had become steel. "And you will listen very carefully, because I will only say this once." She stepped forward, and despite her small size, every ambassador in the room stepped back. "We want a seat at this table. And we want you to understand something very clearly." She pointed at the view screen. "The next time you threaten our world, the next shot will not be a demonstration." And in the silence that followed, every galactic empire began to understand that everything they thought they knew about the universe had just changed forever. Commander David Chun stood on the bridge of the Prometheus Unbound and watched the chaos unfold on his tactical display. And despite everything, he felt no satisfaction in what he saw. The Conclave Station had erupted into panic, with ships scrambling in every direction as sensors tried and failed to make sense of what they were detecting. And emergency broadcasts flooded every frequency with demands for information that no one could provide. "Commander," said Lieutenant Park from the sensor station, "the Dominion battle group is moving to intercept, and Admiral Yethra is demanding we stand down or face immediate destruction." Chun turned to look at the display, which showed 12 Dominion warships forming an attack formation, and he felt a familiar weight settle in his chest. He had not wanted this 20 years ago. A Dominion raiding party had attacked a human colony world called New Helsinki, and the attack had been deemed a minor border incident by the Conclave. While within acceptable parameters of imperial expansion, David Chun had been a young officer on that world, home on leave to visit his family, and he had watched from a bunker as Dominion ships burned everything he loved to ash: his wife Sarah, his daughter Maya, his parents, and 200,000 other human beings had died that day. And the galaxy had shrugged and moved on. He had spent every day since then preparing for this moment. "Open a channel to Admiral Yethra," he said. And his voice was calm, despite the memories that threatened to overwhelm him. The view screen flickered, and the Admiral's face appeared, her reptilian features twisted with barely controlled fury. "Human," she spat. "You will power down your weapons and surrender your vessel immediately, or I will personally oversee the destruction of your homeworld." Chun looked at her for a long moment. "Admiral, I know who you are, and I know your service record, and I know that you believe you are doing your duty to your empire." He paused. 20 years ago, ships under Dominion command attacked a world called New Helsinki, and they killed my family along with 200,000 others. And your government called it an acceptable action. The Admiral's expression flickered. "Just for a moment, I am not here for revenge," Chung continued, "because revenge would mean becoming what you are. And I refuse to do that." He stood straighter. "But I am here to ensure that no human family ever suffers what mine suffered. And if that means demonstrating exactly what we are capable of, then so be it." He nodded to his weapons officer. "Target the asteroid at coordinate 7-7-Mark-3 and fire one shot at minimum power." The Prometheus Unbound's main weapon activated with a sound like a thunderclap, and a beam of light that hurt to look at lanced across space toward a small rocky body floating in the void. The asteroid did not explode. It simply ceased to exist. One moment it was there, a chunk of rock and ice roughly 2 kilometers across, and the next moment there was nothing but a brief flash of energy as matter was converted directly into light. The sensors on the Dominion ships went wild, and Chum watched as the battlegroup halted its advance, and he could see the fear spreading through their formation. "That was our main weapon at minimum power," Chun said. "And we have 47 more ships just like this one. And they have been watching your empires for years, learning your weaknesses and mapping your defenses." Admiral Yethra's face had gone pale. "How?" she whispered. "Because this technology is beyond anything we have ever seen." Chun allowed himself a small smile. "Let me tell you a story." "Admiral," the display behind him changed, showing images from humanity's secret history. 70 years ago, our first deep space probes detected something strange in the outer reaches of our solar system. And when we sent ships to investigate, we found the wreckage of a vessel that predated every current civilization by millions of years. The images showed the broken hull of an ancient ship, its surfaces covered in symbols that no human had ever seen before. We called them the Forerunners, and they left behind technology so advanced that it seemed like magic. And while your empires watched us stumble through what you called primitive spaceflight, our best minds were reverse engineering secrets that you cannot imagine." Chum stepped closer to the view screen. "We built in silence, Admiral, and we prepared in darkness. And we watched every time your people looked at us with contempt." He let his voice harden. "We are not primitives, and we never were. And the only reason you thought so was because we chose to let you believe it." On the conclave station, Captain Vasquez was watching the same transmission, and she saw the faces of the assembled ambassadors as they realized the scope of what they were facing. High Arbiter Zahn's mandibles were clicking in agitation. "This changes nothing," he said, but his voice lacked conviction, "because one fleet, however powerful, cannot stand against the combined might of 12 empires." Vasquez turned to face him. "You are right," she said. "And one fleet cannot stand against 12 empires, which is why we have more than one fleet." She pressed another button on her device. Throughout conclave space, in systems that the empires had considered secure for centuries, human warships began to decloak one by one. Like stars winking into existence, they revealed themselves. and each one was a titan of war that dwarfed anything the gathered empires had ever built. 47 ships appeared in total, positioned at strategic points throughout the galaxy, and they had been there for years, watching and waiting and learning. "We have been among you all along," Vasquez said, "and you never knew. And that should tell you everything you need to know about how seriously you should take us now." Back on the Prometheus Unbound, Commander Chun watched the chaos with tired eyes. He had dreamed of this moment for 20 years. Imagined the fear on alien faces as they realized that humanity was no longer prey, and he had expected to feel triumph. Instead, he felt only sadness. These beings were not monsters, not really, and they were simply products of a galaxy that had taught them that strength meant domination and that weakness meant death. He had hoped that humanity could be different, that they could find a way to exist in this universe without becoming what they had always feared. And now he would find out if that hope was justified. "Commander," said Lieutenant Park, "the Dominion battle group is withdrawing, and Admiral Yethra is requesting terms for a ceasefire." Chun nodded slowly. "Tell her we have only one demand," he said, "and it is very simple." He looked at the stars on the view screen, at the galaxy that had dismissed his species for so long. "We want to be treated as equals, and we want a seat at the table. And we want our right to exist to be recognized by every power in known space." He paused. "And tell her that if anyone threatens our world again, we will not be merciful a second time." The message was sent, and across the galaxy, empires that had ruled for millennia began to understand that the universe had just become a very different place. The conclave fractured within hours of humanity's revelation, and the careful alliances that had held the galaxy together for centuries began to crumble like sandcastles before a rising tide in the Dominion capital. Ambassador Kethral stood before the Supreme Council and demanded immediate military action, his forearms waving in agitation as he described the human threat. "They are one species," he shouted, "with 48 ships, and we have 10,000. So surely numbers must count for something." But the council was divided, because some of them had seen the sensor readings from the asteroid's destruction, and they understood that technology like that changed every equation. Meanwhile, in the shadows of the hegemony's inner chambers, High Arbiter Zahn was meeting with representatives of empires that had long been rivals, and desperation was making unlikely allies. "The humans must be destroyed," he said, his mandibles clicking with barely contained fury, "because if we allow them to survive, they will eventually turn their weapons against us all." The Dominion agreed, and so did the Kethral sovereignty, and within 3 days a coalition had formed, bringing together 3 of the galaxy's most powerful empires in a single desperate alliance. Their combined fleet numbered over 10,000 warships, the greatest armada ever assembled in galactic history, and they gathered at a staging point 3 light years from the conclave. Station Commander Chen received the news while reviewing tactical reports in his ready room, and he felt his heart sink, even though he had expected something like this. "They are calling it the Coalition of Civilized Races," said Captain Vasquez, her holographic image flickering slightly due to the distance. "And they are claiming that humanity is a threat to galactic stability that must be neutralized." Chun laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Civilized races," he repeated. "And these are the same civilized races that plan to strip mine our world and enslave our people." Vasquez nodded. "The irony is not lost on me. But that does not change the situation. And 10,000 ships is a lot of ships, even with our technological advantage." Chun stood and walked to the viewport, staring out at the stars. "What about the other empires?" he asked. "Because surely not everyone supports this coalition." "The Volanthi Collective has reached out secretly," Vasquez replied, "and they have been oppressed by the Dominion for generations. So they see us as potential liberators." She paused, Several smaller species have also made contact, and they want to know if humanity will protect them if they refuse to join the coalition. Chun closed his eyes. This was not what he had wanted, not what any of them had wanted, and the dream of simply being left alone was rapidly becoming impossible. "We cannot protect everyone," he said quietly. "But we also cannot stand by while innocent species are threatened for refusing to help destroy us." He turned back to face Vasquez's image. "Prepare our fleet for combat, and send a message to the Volante and the others, and tell them that humanity stands with anyone who chooses peace over aggression." Vasquez saluted. "And the coalition fleet?" She asked. Chun's jaw tightened. "If they come for us, we will meet them, and we will show them that there are consequences for choosing war." 3 days later, the coalition fleet jumped into the space around the Conclave station, and the sight of 10,000 warships emerging from hyperspace was enough to make even the most hardened observers tremble. Admiral Yethra commanded the combined forces from the bridge of her flagship, and despite her earlier fear, she had convinced herself that numbers would prevail. "The humans have only 48 ships," she reminded her officers, "and no matter how advanced their technology, they cannot be everywhere at once." She was wrong. The Battle of Conclave Station began with a simple transmission from Commander Chun. "Admiral Yethra," he said, "I hoped we could avoid this, because I know you are a warrior who values honor, and I know you are doing what you believe is right." The Admiral's response was cold. "Surrender your vessels, and your homeworld will be spared." Chun shook his head slowly. "I cannot do that, and I think you know why. So let me offer you one final chance to withdraw." The Admiral laughed. "You are outnumbered 200 to 1, Commander. So what possible chance could you have?" Chun's expression did not change. Better chance than you think." He gave the order to engage. What followed was not a battle in any traditional sense, because the human ships did not fight the way the coalition expected, and every assumption the Admiral had made proved catastrophically wrong. The Prometheus Unbound moved in ways that violated conventional physics, folding space around itself so that weapons fired at its position passed harmlessly through empty void, and when it fired back, its being struck with impossible accuracy. The minion cruisers found their shields useless against weapons that attacked through dimensions they had never known existed, and their missiles were redirected mid-flight, slamming into their own sister ships. The hegemony's famous shock troops attempted to board a human destroyer, only to find themselves trapped in spatial bubbles that held them motionless while the ship's crew calmly stunned them with non-lethal weapons within 2 hours. The coalition fleet had been reduced to scattered, limping wrecks, and not a single human ship had been destroyed. But here is where the story became something different, something that none of the coalition commanders had expected. Human ships stopped firing. Commander Chun broadcast on all frequencies. "All coalition vessels, stand down and prepare to receive medical assistance, because this battle is over." Admiral Yethra, her flagship crippled and drifting, could not believe what she was hearing. "You are not going to destroy us?" she asked, her voice thick with confusion. "No," Chun replied, "because destruction was never our goal, and revenge was never our purpose." Human shuttles began launching from every ship in the fleet, carrying medical teams and supplies, and they docked with enemy vessels that had been trying to kill them minutes before Chun himself boarded the Admiral's flagship, walking through corridors filled with wounded Dominion soldiers. And he personally helped carry injured crew members to the medical bay. Admiral Yethra found him there an hour later, kneeling beside a young Dominion officer whose legs had been crushed in the battle, holding the soldier's claw while medics worked to save his life. "Why?" she asked, and her voice had lost all its arrogance. "Because you had us beaten, and you could have finished us all." Chun looked up at her, and his eyes were filled with exhaustion and sadness. "Because we are not you." he said quietly. "And we never wanted to be you, and we just wanted to be safe." He stood slowly, leaving the young soldier in the medic's capable hands. "Your empires taught us that the galaxy is a place where the strong devour the weak, and where mercy is a weakness that gets you killed." He met her eyes. "We are choosing to prove that wrong, Admiral, because if we become like you in order to survive, then survival is not worth the price." Admiral Yethra stood in silence for a long moment, watching human medics work alongside her own crew to save Dominion lives. And something shifted in her understanding of the universe. "You are either the most foolish species in the galaxy," she said finally, "or the most wise." Chun smiled tiredly. "Most days I am not sure which one myself, but I choose to hope it is the latter." Outside, the stars continued to shine, indifferent to the choices made by the small beings that lived beneath them. But in that moment, something had changed. The galaxy would never be quite the same again. The galaxy reeled in the aftermath of the Battle of Conclave Station, and the news spread faster than light itself could travel, carried by ships and signals and whispered rumors that grew with each retelling. The mighty coalition had been broken, not just defeated but humiliated, and the species they had dismissed as primitives had shown mercy to their beaten enemies. Instead of destroying them on 100 worlds, oppressed species looked at each other and asked the same question. If the humans could defeat the empires, then perhaps we do not have to live in fear anymore. Rebellion sparked across Dominion territory, and protests erupted in hegemony cities, and the old order that had seemed eternal began to crack at its foundations on Earth. Commander David Chen returned to a hero's welcome that made him deeply uncomfortable. Crowds lined the streets of the capital, cheering and waving flags, and children wore costumes modeled after the crew of the Prometheus Unbound. And Chun smiled and waved while feeling hollow inside. That night, alone in his apartment for the first time in months, he sat in darkness and let the memories wash over him. He saw the faces of the Dominion soldiers he had killed, beings who had families of their own, beings who had been following orders just as he had followed his. And he wondered if their ghosts would visit him the way his family's ghost still did. He pulled out an old photograph, worn and faded, showing a young woman with laughing eyes and a little girl with pigtails who looked just like her mother. "Sarah," he whispered to the empty room, "I hope I did the right thing, because some days I am not sure anymore." The photograph did not answer, and Chun sat in the darkness until dawn across the city. The Global Defense Council was meeting an emergency session, and the debate had grown heated. "We have an opportunity," said General Morrison, his fist striking the table for emphasis, "to reshape the entire galaxy according to our values. And we would be fools not to take it." "And what values would those be?" asked Dr. Elena Vasquez, who had traded her captain's uniform for civilian clothes but still carried herself with military precision. "Because if our values involve conquering others and forcing them to accept our rule, then how are we any different from the empires we just defeated?" Morrison's face reddened. "We would be better rulers than they were. That is what every tyrant in history has believed," Vasquez replied. "And it has never been true." The debate raged for hours, and in the end, the council reached a compromise that satisfied no one completely, but that most could accept. Humanity would not seek to conquer, but they would also not retreat, and they would use their power to protect those who asked for protection, while encouraging the galaxy to build something better than what had come before. Meanwhile, in the dark spaces between stars, a different kind of meeting was taking place. High Arbiter Zahn had escaped the battle aboard a small shuttle, and now he floated in the void, waiting for a signal that he feared might never come. When the ship finally arrived, it was unlike anything he had ever seen, a vessel of black crystal that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. And it moved without any visible means of propulsion. A voice spoke directly into his mind. You called upon the remnant. Aye, Arbiter, and we have answered. Zahn felt fear colder than the vacuum of space. But he pressed on. The humans have Forerunner technology, he said, and they have used it to humiliate the greatest empires in the galaxy. So I come seeking an alliance. The voice laughed, and the sound was like breaking glass. We know about the humans, Arbiter, and we have watched them for longer than you can imagine. And we find their possession of sacred technology to be an abomination that cannot be allowed to continue. A figure materialized before him, robed in shadows that moved like living things. And where its face should have been, there was only darkness. The Forerunners were gods, the figure said, and their technology was meant only for those worthy to inherit their legacy, not for primitive creatures who found it by accident. Zahn swallowed hard. Then you will help me destroy them. The shadow figure tilted its head. We will do more than destroy them, Arbiter, because we have found something in the deep void that the Forerunners left behind. A weapon designed to cleanse the galaxy of unworthy life. The figure gestured, and an image appeared in the air between them. It was a structure of impossible size, a machine that dwarfed even the Prometheus Unbound, and it pulsed with energy that made Zahn's eyes water to look at it. The Purifier, the shadow said, dormant for 1,000,000 years, waiting for someone to wake it. Zahn felt triumph flooding through him. And you can control it. The shadow laughed again. We believed so. Yes. Something in that answer made Zahn's blood run cold. What do you mean? Believed. The shadow figure was silent for a long moment. We woke the Purifier 3 days ago, it said finally. And we discovered that it does not accept commands, because it was designed to operate independently, to seek out and destroy all life that does not meet the Forerunner's standards. Zahn's throat went dry. All life. All life. The shadow confirmed, including yours and mine and every species that currently exists in this galaxy. The image of the Purifier pulsed, and Zahn saw that it was moving, drifting slowly but inexorably toward populated space. What have you done? He whispered. The shadow figure turned away. We have awakened the end of all things, Arbiter, and now nothing in this galaxy can stop it. Zahn was left alone in the void, watching the distant glow of the approaching apocalypse. And for the first time in his long life, he understood what true terror felt like back on Earth. Commander Chun was summoned from his dark apartment by an urgent communication. And when he saw the sensor data, his exhaustion vanished instantly. Forerunner energy signatures, he said. But not from our ships. No, sir, said Lieutenant Park. Her face pale, and whatever this thing is, it is heading directly for the core worlds, and our computers estimate it will arrive in approximately 30 days. Chun stared at the readings, and he felt the weight of impossible responsibility settling onto his shoulders once again. Get me Captain Vasquez, he said, and contact every fleet commander in human space. He paused, and reach out to the coalition as well, because I have a feeling that we are all going to need each other before this is over. The stars continued to shine, but now they seemed dimmer somehow, overshadowed by the approaching darkness that threatened to extinguish them all. The Purifier moved through space like a god of death, and everywhere it passed, stars dimmed and worlds fell silent. It was vast beyond comprehension. A machine mountain that stretched for hundreds of kilometers, covered in weapons that fired beams of pure annihilation. And its path led directly toward the heart of civilized Space Commander Chun stood on the bridge of the Prometheus, unbound, and watched the approaching nightmare on his view screen. And for the first time since the battle at Conclave Station, he felt something like despair. Our weapons can damage it, said Lieutenant Park, her voice barely steady. But our simulations suggested would take sustained fire from all 48 of our ships for approximately 72 hours to destroy it. And it would wipe us out long before then. Chun finished. Park nodded. Estimated survival time for our fleet in direct combat is approximately 43 minutes. Chun closed his eyes. He had known this was coming, had felt it in his bones since the first sensor readings arrived. And now he had to face a truth that he had been avoiding. There was only one way to stop the purifier. And it was not a way that allowed for retreat. A communication alert chimed, and Captain Vasquez's face appeared on the screen. But she was not alone. Behind her stood Admiral Yethra of the Dominion, Ambassador Kethril of the Sovereignty, and representatives from over 30 species that had once been enemies. "Commander Chun," Vasquez said, "I have been in contact with what remains of the coalition leadership, and they have seen the sensor data." Admiral Yethra stepped forward, and her voice was rough with emotion. "We were fools," she said, "and we spent centuries fighting among ourselves while a threat like this lay dormant, waiting to destroy us all." She met Chun's eyes through the viewscreen. "The Dominion pledges its remaining fleet to the defense of all life in this galaxy, and we ask to fight alongside humanity against this common enemy." One by one, the other representatives spoke, offering ships and soldiers and whatever resources they had left. And Chun felt something shift in his heart. These beings had tried to destroy humanity just weeks ago, and now they were asking to stand together. "We accept your alliance," he said, "and we will share everything we know about Forerunner technology with your scientists." He paused. "But I must be honest with you all, because I do not believe conventional combat can stop the purifier." The assembled leaders fell silent. "Our analysis suggests that the only way to destroy it is from within," Chung continued. "And someone would need to fly a ship into its core and overload their reactor to create a chain reaction powerful enough to tear it apart." Admiral Yethra's scales went pale. "That would be a suicide mission." "Yes," Chun said simply. "It would." The silence stretched for a long moment. "I will do it," Chun said finally, "because the Prometheus Unbound has the most powerful reactor in the fleet, and because I have been preparing to die since the day the Dominion took my family." His crew turned to look at him, and he saw the protest forming on their faces. "Commander," said Lieutenant Park, "if you go, we go with you." Chun shook his head. "That is not necessary." "It is not about necessity," Park replied, "because we have served with you for 7 years, and we have followed you into battle against impossible odds, and we are not going to let you face the end alone." One by one, every member of his bridge crew stood and voiced their agreement, and Chun felt tears forming in his eyes that he refused to let fall. "Very well," he said quietly. "Then we go together." The combined fleet gathered at the edge of the Purifier's approach path, and it was the largest armada ever assembled in galactic history. Over 6,000 ships from 34 species hung in formation, and for the first time in memory, former enemies flew side by side under a unified command. The battle began at dawn, measured by Earth time, and it was terrible beyond description. The Purifier's weapons carved through ships like a scythe through wheat, and entire squadrons vanished in flashes of light that seared the eyes of those who watched. But the fleet pressed forward. Dominion cruisers shielded human destroyers with their own hulls, and hegemony fighters flew cover for Volanti transports. And in the chaos of combat, something beautiful was being born. Species that had hated each other for generations were dying together, not for conquest or glory, but for the simple hope that others might live. Commander Chun watched from the bridge of the Prometheus Unbound as the fleet created an opening in the Purifier's defenses, a narrow corridor of relative safety leading to its core. "This is it," he said, and his voice was calm. He activated the fleet-wide communication system. "This is Commander David Chun of the human warship Prometheus Unbound, and in a few minutes my crew and I will attempt to destroy the Purifier from within." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "I want you all to know that it has been the greatest honor of my life to fight alongside you today. And I want you to remember something after we are gone. The words came from somewhere deep inside him, from a place he had not known existed. "We were never meant to be conquerors," he said. "And humanity was never meant to rule this galaxy by force, because from the beginning, we just wanted to be neighbors." He thought of Sarah and Maya, and he thought of the young Dominion soldier whose claw he had held in the medical bay. And he thought of all the beings who had died today so that others might live. "Build something better than what came before," he said. "And remember that the strongest thing in the universe is not a weapon or a fleet, but the choice to reach out in friendship instead of fear." He cut the communication and turned to his crew. "Take us in." The Prometheus Unbound dove toward the Purifier's core, weaving through weapons fire and debris, and Chun felt strangely at peace in his final moments. As the ship's reactor began its overload sequence, he pulled out the old photograph one last time. "I am coming home," he whispered. The explosion lit up the void like a newborn star, and the Purifier screamed as its ancient systems tore themselves apart. And when the light faded, there was nothing left but silence and drifting dust. The galaxy had been saved in the years that followed. The species that had fought together at the Battle of the Purifier formed a new alliance called the Galactic Compact. And when they offered humanity a position of leadership, the humans refused. "We will be guardians and teachers," said Captain Elena Vasquez, now gray-haired and walking with a cane. "But we will not rule over anyone." The Forerunner technology was shared freely with any species that pledged to use it for peace. And slowly, generation by generation, the old ways of conquest and domination began to fade on Earth. A memorial was built to Commander Chun and the crew of the Prometheus Unbound. And people came from across the galaxy to pay their respects many years later. An old woman visited the memorial with a young child at her side, a Dominion girl whose scales shimmered in the sunlight. "What does the writing say?" the child asked, pointing at the inscription on the base of the monument. Captain Vasquez, for it was her, smiled and bent down to read the words aloud. "They looked at the stars and saw only conquest. But we looked at the stars and saw neighbors we had not met yet." The child tilted her head. "Is that what Commander Chen believed?" Vasquez looked up at the statue of the man she had known, frozen forever in bronze, with his hand reaching toward the sky. And she felt the tears flowing freely down her aged cheeks. "It is what he taught us all to believe," she said. "And it is why the galaxy is different now." The sun set over the memorial as the old woman and the young alien child walked away together. And above them, the stars began to appear. No longer symbols of fear and conquest, but promises of friendship yet to be discovered. And somewhere out there, in the vast darkness between galaxies, the light of the Prometheus Unbound's final explosion was still traveling, carrying a message to any who might one day receive it. "We are humanity, and we chose hope." That message would travel forever, a beacon in the endless night. Proof that even in a universe that often seemed cruel and uncaring, there was room for kindness and sacrifice and love. The story was over, but the legacy had only just begun.